As the sun set, Daiho walked alone to the spot where he had first offered Baram food. The snow was deep, the air was cold, and everything was quiet. He stood there for a long time, just breathing and thinking. Movement in the trees caught his eye. A familiar shape emerged from the shadows. Baram. The wolverine stopped about 20 feet away. He did not approach closer. He simply sat in the snow and watched the human who had once asked for his help. Daiho did not move. He did not call out or make any gesture. This was Baram's choice, same as everything else. After a minute, the wolverine stood, turned, and disappeared back into the forest. But before he left, he paused for just a moment and looked back. It was brief, barely noticeable, but it was there. Daiho smiled. "You are welcome, friend. Thank you for everything." The next morning, he received news that the first group of freed combat creatures had been successfully integrated into supervised habitats. Their progress would be monitored, but early signs were encouraging. Creatures that had known only violence were discovering play. Predators that had been forced to fight were learning to rest. Ambassador Lee Borum sent a message. 3 more species have requested Earth's assistance in developing ethical combat training programs. We are becoming known for something other than being new and quiet. How does it feel? Daiho typed his response. Strange, hopeful, exhausting, all of the above. 6 months later, the first anniversary of the challenge arrived. The council held a commemoration ceremony. Holographic displays showed key moments from that day. Baram's fearless charge, Thruckmara's rebellion, the moment everything changed. Daiho was invited to speak, but he declined. Instead, he submitted a written statement. The credit belongs to 2 creatures who showed the galaxy what courage really means. One chose to trust when trust was risky. The other chose freedom when freedom was terrifying. We should honor them by ensuring their choices were not in vain. The statement was read aloud in the council chamber and broadcast across the galaxy. It became one of the most quoted texts in modern council history. In the North Woods, Baram hunted through fresh snow. His territory was secure, his food sources were adequate, and spring would come eventually. He had no awareness of ceremonies or speeches or laws passed in his honor. He was simply living, fighting when necessary, resting when possible, and moving through the world with the confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was. On Axios Prime, Thruckmara basked in artificial sunlight designed to mimic its homeworld star. The Serpent was not alone anymore. 2 other battle serpents had joined the sanctuary, both showing similar trauma patterns. Thruckmara had begun displaying what Choi Sujin called mentoring behavior, showing the newer arrivals that curiosity did not lead to pain. It is teaching them, she explained to a visiting researcher. Teaching them how to be something other than weapons. I did not expect that level of social intelligence. The researcher, a Kalathi scientist named Senna, watched in fascination. Senna's species had been among the strongest opponents of the Companion Rights Act. But after visiting the sanctuary and seeing the results, Senna had become one of its strongest advocates. We were wrong, Senna said simply. My people were wrong for 800 years. These creatures suffered because we convinced ourselves they could not feel. We called it tradition, but it was just cruelty with a fancy name. Choi Sujin nodded. Recognition is the first step. Changing systems is the second. Your species' decision to retrofit all your facilities with the new standards is making a real difference. How many creatures have been helped so far? Over 3,000 across the galaxy. It is not enough, but it is a start. Back in the council chamber, new challenges arose. Some species tried to find loopholes in the Companion Rights Act. Others claimed economic hardship from the changes. But the momentum had shifted. Every time someone tried to roll back the protections, dozens of species pushed back. Earth's delegation had grown. Yoon Ha-jin now led a team of 15 specialists helping species transition to ethical practices. Park Min-ho served as a consultant on wildlife behavior. Even Voss, the former Sathri handler, had earned a position teaching reformed combat training techniques. Daiho himself had stepped back from day-to-day operations. He still advised when asked, but he believed the movement needed to grow beyond any single person. If this only works when I am involved, then it is not really working, he told Lee Borum. It needs to become normal, expected. Just the way things are done. A year after the challenge, the sanctuary on Axios Prime held an open house. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species attended. They saw creatures that had been broken learning to play. They saw animals that had known only pain discovering curiosity. They saw proof that change was possible. The most powerful moment came when a young Sathri child asked Thrakmara's keeper if the serpent was happy. Choi Sujin knelt down to the child's level. I think so. Happiness looks different for every creature. But Thrakmara has choices now. That is what matters most. The child thought about this. My teacher says choices are important. Your teacher is right. 5 years after the challenge, Park Min-ho published his definitive study on Wolverine behavior. It became required reading in xenobiology courses across the galaxy. The core message was simple. Size does not determine strength, and control is not the same as respect. Baram, now older and still wild, continued living his life completely unaware that he had become a symbol. His territory had expanded slightly. He had sired offspring with 2 different females. His genetics were now part of the next generation of Northwood's Wolverines. Minho occasionally caught glimpses of him on monitoring equipment. The Wolverine was slower than he once was, but still formidable. Age had not diminished his confidence or his capability. Do you think he remembers? Yoon Ha-jin asked during one of her visits to the research station. I think he remembers the way any wild animal remembers, as an experience that happened, neither good nor bad, just part of his life. He does not assign meaning to it like we do. That is probably healthier. Probably. 10 years after the challenge, Arbitrator Kulnash called Daeho to a private meeting. The ancient being looked exactly as he had a decade earlier. Time moved differently for his species. I wanted you to know, Kulnash said, that the Companion Rights Act has now been adopted by every council species. Even the last holdouts have 6. Months had passed since the challenge that changed everything. The Galactic Council chamber looked the same from the outside, but inside the atmosphere was completely different. Species that once barely acknowledged each other now engaged in heated debates about animal rights, consciousness, and the ethics of combat challenges. Kang Daeho stood before the full assembly, presenting the findings of the Companion Rights Committee. He had not wanted to lead the committee, but Arbitrator Kulnash had insisted. You started this, the ancient being had said. You should see it through. The statistics were sobering. Across the galaxy, over 15,000 engineered combat creatures were held in conditions similar to Thrakmara's. Pain collars were the least of it. Some species used neural implants that caused constant discomfort. Others employed chemical conditioning that kept their creatures in perpetual states of aggression. The deeper the committee dug, the worse it got. We propose the Companion Rights Act, Daeho said, his voice carrying through the translation systems. It has 3 core principles. First, no creature used in combat or service can be controlled through pain or fear. Second, all engineered or trained creatures must have regular psychological evaluation and care. Third, any creature that shows signs of suffering must be retired and rehabilitated. The chamber erupted in response. Some species applauded, others shouted protests. Ambassador Lee Boram, watching from the human delegation, saw the vote count projections on her datapad. It was going to be close. A representative from the Kalati Empire stood. Her species had used pain conditioning for 8 centuries. This act would destroy our traditions. Our battle creatures are property, bred for specific purposes. You cannot apply emotional concepts to tools. Before Daeho could respond, another voice rang out. It was Choi Sujin, attending as the committee's xenopsychology expert. They are not tools. They are thinking, feeling beings. I have spent 6 months working with Thrakmara. The Serpent can solve complex puzzles, shows preferences for certain foods, and even displays what we would call playfulness. All of this was hidden under years of trauma from pain conditioning. She brought up holographic displays showing Thrakmara's rehabilitation progress. The audience watched as the massive Serpent carefully manipulated objects, investigated new environments, and even engaged in what looked like social behavior with the rehabilitation staff. This is what was always there, Choi Sujin continued. Under the pain and the fear, intelligence, personality, the capacity for more than just violence. If one Serpent can show this much change in 6 months, imagine what thousands of others could become if given the same chance. The Kalathi representative sat down, looking thoughtful. Around the chamber, body language shifted. Species that had been opposed were reconsidering. Yunhajan watched from the security station where she now worked as Council Defense Coordinator. The position had been created after the challenge, when the Council realized they needed someone who understood both combat and ethics. She pulled up the live vote count. It was still too close to call. Back on Earth, in a small research station in northern Canada, Park Minho tracked a familiar signal on his monitoring equipment. Baram was moving through his territory, same as always. The Wolverine had no idea that his brief adventure had sparked a galactic revolution. He was busy dealing with the important things, finding food, marking boundaries, and preparing for winter. Minho smiled as he watched the tracking data. You are probably the most famous Wolverine in the galaxy, and you do not even know it. His research station had become something of a pilgrimage site. Scientists from dozens of worlds wanted to study Earth's predators, to understand what made them different. Minho had to limit visitors to protect the wildlife, but he made exceptions for serious researchers. Today, his visitor was unusual. Thrakmara's primary handler, a being named Voss, had requested permission to observe Wolverines in their natural habitat. Voss had been part of Vexilith's team, but had testified against the Warlord during the investigations. Now Voss was trying to understand a better way. They really do not fear anything their size or larger? Voss asked, watching video footage of Baram confronting a black bear 3 times his weight. Fear is the wrong word, Minho explained. They assess risk differently. A Wolverine knows it can be hurt, but it also knows it can fight back effectively enough that most predators decide the meal is not worth the effort. It is confidence backed by genuine capability. And they bond with humans? Bond is complicated. Baram trusted Deho, but he was never domesticated. The moment the challenge was over, he went back to being wild. That is important. Real trust does not require ownership. Voss processed this quietly. On his home world, the concept of trusting something without controlling it was foreign. But he was learning. They all were. Back in the council chamber, the debate had reached its final stage. Kulnash called for order. The vote will now commence. All members have 10 seconds to register their decision. Deho watched the vote counter climb. Numbers flickered on screens throughout the chamber. For every species that voted yes, another voted no. The margin was razor thin. Lee Boram's hands gripped her datapad tightly. Beside her, other human delegates held their breath. 6 months of work, thousands of hours of testimony, countless negotiations, everything came down to this moment. The counter stopped. Silence fell across the chamber. Kulnash's ancient voice announced the results. The Companion Rights Act passes by a margin of 43 votes. It is now council law. The chamber exploded with noise. Some species cheered. Others angrily filed formal protests. But it was done. For the first time in galactic history, the rights of combat creatures were protected by law. Deho allowed himself a small smile. It was not complete victory. There were loopholes, compromises, species that would resist implementation. But it was a foundation, something to build on. Yunhajan appeared at his side as he left the chamber floor. Congratulations. You just made a lot of powerful enemies. And a lot of powerful friends, he replied.
It balances out. What happens now?
Now the real work begins. Passing the law was the easy part. Enforcing it across 600 species is going to be much harder. But enforcement was already beginning. 12 species voluntarily opened their combat creature facilities for inspection. 4 more requested help designing rehabilitation programs. The Sathri Empire, under new leadership after Vexilith's disgrace, announced they were dismantling their entire Battle Serpent program. 3 weeks after the vote, Deho received an unexpected message. It was from Vexilith, now stripped of his military rank and living in exile. The message was brief. I watched the recordings of the challenge again. I finally understand what I was too blind to see before. Strength without honor is just cruelty. I am sorry for what I did to Thrakmara. Deho read it twice. He did not reply immediately. Some apologies needed time to be genuine, and some wounds needed space to heal. Instead, he authorized a response from the Companion Rights Committee, offering Vexilith the chance to work in the rehabilitation programs. It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was an opportunity for redemption. On Axios Prime, the first interspecies animal sanctuary opened its doors. The facility was designed to house and rehabilitate combat creatures from across the galaxy. Thrakamara was the first resident, but dozens more were already scheduled to arrive. Choi Sujin served as the sanctuary's chief psychologist. She stood in the main habitat, watching as Thrakamara explored a new enrichment area. The Serpent had grown noticeably healthier in the past months. The dull scales had regained their shine. The hollow look in its eyes had been replaced by alert curiosity. "How is our favorite patient?" asked her assistant. "Making progress every day." Last week, Thrakamara voluntarily approached a group of researchers it had never met before. No fear, no aggression, just curiosity. That would have been impossible 6 months ago. "Do you think it will ever be fully recovered?" Choi Sujin considered the question. "I do not think Thrakamara will ever forget what was done to it. Trauma does not just disappear, but I think it can learn to live with those memories while still experiencing joy, curiosity, and peace. That is what recovery really means." Back on Earth, Daiho finally took a vacation. He returned to the North Woods, to the research station where everything had started. Minho welcomed him with hot coffee and warm food. "Barham is about 8 kilometers north," Minho said. "Same territory, same behavior. It is like the challenge never happened for him." "That is perfect," Daiho said. "He should not have to carry the weight of what we did." They spent the afternoon reviewing Minho's latest research. Wolverine populations were stable. Their territories were protected. The species was doing well. As the sun set, Daiho walked alone to the spot where he had first offered Bahram food. The snow was deep, the air was cold, and everything was quiet. He stood there for a long time, just breathing and thinking.